The grocery store was Samantha's idea of a Saturday. She was comparing two brands when she felt someone stop beside her. And then it spoke. Oh, a small sound. Deliberate in the way that small sounds could be deliberate. That brand is a bit much. Samantha looked up. The woman beside her was in her late 20s, polished in a particular way. Sharp eyes that had already finished their assessment before Samantha met them. I'm sorry. I'm just saying. The smile arrived. Perfect surface. You look like you're still. A brief pause. A slow look from the item in Samantha's hand down to her clothes and back up, working things out. Budget-wise. There's a cheaper section at the back. Better options. For people like you. The aisle went quiet. Samantha set the item down. Slowly. Deliberately. Turned to face the woman fully. She didn't raise her voice. She never raised her voice. She simply brought to bear the particular quality of attention that had made medical residents straighten and senior consultants reconsider and operating rooms go still, the attention of a woman who was fully, completely present and entirely unafraid of what she found. I want to make sure I understand what just happened. Her voice was even, almost conversational. You looked at me, made a decision about what you saw, and then said it out loud. A pause. In public. Another pause. To a stranger. The woman, Yaren, though Samantha didn't know that yet, held the smile. Don't be sensitive. I'm not sensitive. Samantha tilted her head slightly. The scalpel precision of it. I'm precise. There's a difference. And what I'm saying precisely is that what you just did tells me considerably more about you than you intended. Yaren stepped closer. I was trying to help. No, Samantha said it simply. Flatly. The single word with no heat in it, which made it land harder than anger would have. You weren't. Samantha. His voice came from the end of the aisle. Jiyoung stood there, dark jacket, Saturday clothes, a basket in one hand, and the aisle did what every space did when he entered it. It reorganized. Not dramatically. Just naturally. The way spaces did around men who didn't need to ask for room. He walked toward them. Unhurried. His eyes moved from Samantha to Yaren. He stopped beside Samantha. Not in front of her. Beside her. He looked at Yaren. Something moved across Yaren's face then. Slow at first, the way recognition sometimes arrived slowly when it was the last thing you expected. Then faster. Then all at once. She knew that face. She had grown up watching her sister keep photographs she should have thrown away. She had heard the name said in a particular tone for years, with longing, then with bitterness, then with the specific controlled fury of someone who had decided that fury was more dignified than grief. Baek Jiyoung. Is there a problem? He said. Quietly. The particular quiet. Yaren's mouth was open slightly. Nothing was coming out. The composure she had walked into the aisle with had done something that composure did when the ground shifted unexpectedly. It simply stopped working. Samantha picked the item back up. Placed it in their basket. Looked at Jiyoung with the ease of a woman who had already finished the conversation and had nothing left to say to anyone in this aisle except him. No problem, she said. We're done here. They walked away together. Past the displays, past the other shoppers who had found very interesting things to look at in the immediate vicinity, past Yaren standing alone between the produce and the weight of what she had just understood. Some people walk into your life and reveal who they are immediately. Others spend years hiding it. Samantha didn't know it yet, but the woman standing in that grocery store aisle was about to pull something dangerous into her marriage. Don't forget to subscribe if this is your first time here and like the video. Now, stay with me. 1 month. That was how long Samantha Baek, the name still arriving with a small internal recognition every time she encountered it on official documents, on his mother's contact in her phone, on the card the hospital had quietly updated, had been married. 1 month of waking up in a space that had rearranged itself around 2 people instead of 1. 1 month of his coffee cup beside hers on the counter. 1 month of learning the specific topography of a shared life. 1 month of being, without quite having planned for it, happy. The particular happiness that didn't announce itself. that lived in small things and Thursday dinners and Sunday lunches, and the way he always knew when she'd had a difficult shift before she said anything and didn't try to fix it, just stayed present in a way that was its own kind of repair. A month later, she was in a grocery store being told she looked like she had budget concerns, which was, she reflected, briefly, in the car on the way home, a very specific kind of funny. She knew who you were, Samantha said. In the car. Not a question. Jiyoung was driving. He drove the way he did everything, with complete attention and no unnecessary movement. Yes. When did you see it? When she did. Samantha looked out the window. The city moved past in the particular way it moved on Saturday mornings, unhurried, domestic, the city being itself without performing it. Who is she? A pause. Brief. Seojin's younger sister. Samantha absorbed this. Filed it. Let it sit in the organized space where she kept information she wasn't done with yet. Then she turned back to the window. Okay, she said. He glanced at her. Okay. I heard you. A pause. I'm thinking. He looked back at the road. Said nothing. He had learned in the months before the wedding, in the 1 month since, that Samantha's silences were not absences. They were the sound of her processing. Interrupting them was like interrupting a surgery. Counterproductive and somewhat dangerous. They drove the rest of the way home in the comfortable quiet of people who had stopped needing to fill space. Yerin called Seojin from the grocery store parking lot. She sat in her car with her hands in her lap and her composure in pieces around her, and she pressed her sister's name and waited. Seojin answered on the first ring. Tell me. Her voice was the same as always, controlled, precise, the specific stillness of a woman who had spent a year rebuilding herself into something harder than what she was before. Yerin told her. All of it. The aisle. What she'd said. What happened when he appeared. The expression on his face when he stood beside her. The expression on Samantha's face when she picked the item back up and put it in their basket like nothing in that aisle had touched her. Their basket. Because they were shopping together. Because they were, Yerin said the word that had been sitting in her mouth since the moment she recognized him, married. The silence on Seojin's end was long. Are you sure? She said finally. I know his face, Seojin. Another silence. Then something in Seojin's breathing changed. Not audibly, she was too controlled for that. But Yerin had been her sister for 26 years, and she heard it anyway. Come home, Seojin said. Seojin had spent the past year rebuilding quietly. Not emotionally, strategically. She left the city after the gala because she understood exactly what Jiyoung's warning meant. But distance didn't stop her from watching. Through Ryusi, one of the few people who had known both her and Jiyoung before everything collapsed, she kept a careful window into his life. The wedding. Samantha's career. The dinners. The routines. Happiness. She watched all of it with the patience of someone waiting for a weakness. Yerin's call from the grocery store gave her one. A week later, Seojin found something she thought could break them. For 7 years, Jiyoung had been quietly sending money to a woman named Hannah, the daughter of a man who had died because of a decision made inside his family's world years earlier. Jiyoung had been 23 at the time. Too young to stop what happened. Old enough to feel responsible for its consequences. So he made sure Hannah was taken care of. Quietly. Permanently. Without ever speaking about it. Seojin understood immediately how it would look from the outside. A hidden woman. Secret payments. 7 years of silence. She passed the information carefully through someone connected to Ryusi, knowing it would eventually reach Samantha stripped of context. Her name was Minji. Warm, social, the kind of person who shared things she'd heard because she found the world interesting and assumed others did too. Not malicious. Not a tool. She would have been horrified to know she was being used as one. Just a person who trusted people she had reason to trust. Seojin had reason to trust her. That was the point. She met Minji for coffee on a Wednesday, one of their occasional catch-ups, nothing that would seem unusual to anyone observing. And midway through the conversation, In the tone of someone sharing something they'd stumbled across and couldn't quite believe, she mentioned what she'd found. Not fully. Not with names. Just enough. The money. The woman. The years. The secret. Can you imagine? She said. After everything. I just thought someone should probably know. Minji sat with it for 2 days. Then she told Ryusei. Ryusei, who loved Jiyoung and trusted Samantha and believed, fundamentally, that people who loved each other shouldn't keep things like this from each other, told Samantha over lunch on a Friday quietly. With the specific discomfort of a man delivering something he felt obligated to deliver but wished he didn't have to. Samantha drove home from that lunch in silence. She stood in the bathroom long after midnight with the light off. The apartment was quiet. Jiyoung asleep in the next room. The city glowing faintly through the window. Samantha rested both hands against the sink and looked at her reflection without really seeing it. A woman named Hannah. 7 years. A secret she had never heard before. Not fear exactly, but something unfamiliar moving carefully through the space where certainty usually lived. For the first time since the wedding, she wondered briefly what parts of him still existed outside her reach. Then she looked down at the wedding ring on her hand. Not because it solved anything, because it reminded her who she was. Careful. Precise. Not ruled by panic. She turned the bathroom light on, washed her face, and chose to wait for the truth instead of inventing one. She didn't call Jiyoung. She didn't call anyone. She drove home, changed out of her work clothes, made tea she didn't drink, and sat at the kitchen table with the information laid out in front of her the way she laid out the facts of a difficult case, examining each piece, looking for the shape of the whole thing, refusing to let fear or anger be the instrument of her analysis. A woman named Hannah. 7 years of support. A death in his world. A 23-year-old making the only decision available to him. She sat with it for 2 days. She went to work. She came home. She moved through their shared life with a composure so complete and so precise that it was itself the signal, because Jiyoung knew her, had learned her, understood the difference between her ordinary stillness and the stillness that meant something was being held. On the second evening, he came and sat across from her at the kitchen table. Said nothing. Waited. She looked at him. Who is Hannah? He went still. The specific stillness of someone who has heard the exact word they have been both dreading, and, somewhere beneath the dread, relieved to finally hear. He told her everything. Sitting at the kitchen table in the apartment that was theirs, in the city that was theirs, in the life they had been building for 1 month officially and considerably longer than that in every way that mattered, he told her all of it. Choi Dae-sung. The decision that had been made. What it had cost. Hannah at 24 alone, without the support her father's position had provided. The choice he had made at 23 with the specific moral urgency of a young man who understood that he could not undo what had been done, but could not do nothing either. He told it plainly. Without defense and without performance. The way he said everything that mattered, with the full weight of someone who understood that the truth was the only thing worth offering. When he finished, there was a long silence. Samantha looked at her hands on the table. Then at him. Why didn't you tell me? Because it happened before you. Before any of this. A pause. The first one. Because I didn't know how to introduce it into a conversation without it becoming something other than what it is. And because the second pause, longer, I was afraid of exactly this. Not of you knowing. Of you finding out before I'd told you. Of someone else getting there first. Someone did get there first. Yes. He held her gaze. Didn't look away from it. And that is the only thing I did wrong. Not keeping it from you. That was the mistake. Samantha sat with this. She was not a woman who made decisions in the heat of feeling. She was a woman who took information, arranged it, looked at its actual shape, and responded to what was genuinely there rather than to what fear projected onto it. A man who at 23 had taken responsibility for a consequence he didn't cause. Who had maintained that responsibility quietly, without credit, for 7 years. who had told no one not because he was hiding something shameful, but because he was carrying something private in the specific way that private things should be carried. Who had, in this moment, told her everything, without being asked twice, without flinching, without managing her reaction. She asked him 3 more questions. He answered every one immediately. Then she said quietly, "Someone wanted me to hear it this way before I heard it from you." That night Jiyoung called Ryusi first. The conversation was calm but final in the way serious conversations between old friends often were. Ryusi understood immediately that trust had been damaged, even unintentionally. Seojin didn't answer when Jiyoung called her afterward. She saw his name, let it ring, and understood instantly that her plan had failed. Samantha had gone to him directly, and he had told her everything. The foundation event was 3 weeks later. The Baek Foundation's annual spring gathering, different venue from the gala where it had started, but the same world. Same architecture of wealth and influence, and the specific social performance of people who moved through that world as its natural inhabitants. Seojin had found her way onto the periphery of the guest list through a connection she had cultivated specifically for this purpose. She arrived composed, rebuilt, the version of herself that had spent a year becoming harder without appearing harder. She moved through the room with the practiced ease of someone who had attended 1,000 events like this one and knew how they worked. She found her moment when Samantha was briefly alone, Jiyoung drawn into a conversation near the entrance, Samantha near the windows with a glass of water, looking out at the city with the self-contained composure she took everywhere. Seojin crossed the room. Samantha heard her approach. Didn't turn immediately. When she did, when she turned and saw who was standing in front of her, something moved briefly in her expression. Not surprise. She had half expected this. Not fear. She had never been afraid of Seojin. Just the quiet acknowledgement of a woman who recognized what was happening and had already decided how she would move through it. "You look well," Seojin said. She had rehearsed the opening. It came out as intended, controlled, almost warm, the tone of someone who had processed something and arrived at a kind of equanimity. "Seojin." Samantha's voice was even. The equanimity didn't last. It hadn't been real equanimity, it had been the opening position of someone moving toward something. Seojin moved toward it now. She said the things she had been constructing for a year. About Hannah. About the 7 years. About the man Samantha had married and what the parts of him she hadn't been told contained. She said them carefully, precisely, with the specific skill of a woman who understood how to frame truth to function as a wound. Samantha stood and listened. All of it. Every word. Without interrupting. Without her expression changing in any significant way. Without giving Seojin the reaction, the fracture, the uncertainty, the visible damage that all of this had been built to produce. When Seojin finished, there was a silence. Then Samantha said, "He told me." Seojin's face moved. 3 weeks ago. Sitting at our kitchen table. Samantha's voice carried no triumph in it. No heat. Just the flat, complete truth of it. Everything. All of it. Because I asked and he answered. Because that's who he is. A pause. You built something on ground that was already solid before you touched it. Seojin said nothing. Something in her face was doing something complicated, the specific internal work of a person confronting the full extent of a miscalculation. The difference between you and me, Samantha continued, is not him. It was never him. She looked at Seojin with the direct steadiness of a woman who had nothing to prove and therefore nothing to perform. The difference is that you have spent years trying to damage something you don't understand. And I have spent the same years building something you can't touch. A pause. The precision of it. How does it feel to have tried this hard and still ended up exactly where you started? She didn't wait for the answer. She turned. Jiyoung was behind her. He had come through the crowd quietly, arriving at the perimeter of the conversation in time to hear enough. He looked at Seojin with the expression he had shown her before, not anger, which would have required her to still matter enough to generate heat, but the complete and final absence of anything. She had been excised from his attention as thoroughly as she had been excised from his world. He said one thing. Leave the city. Tonight. And understand that this is the last time either of us will say anything to you directly. He offered Samantha his arm. She took it. They walked back into the room. Behind them, Seojin stood at the windows where Samantha had been standing and looked out at the city that had closed around her as completely and as quietly as water closing over a stone. The consequences arrived quietly. Within weeks, every connection Seojin had rebuilt over the past year began closing around her one by one. Doors stopped opening. Calls stopped returning. No threats. No announcements. Just the silent reality of what it meant to be removed permanently from Ji-young's world. 6 weeks later. 3:11 a.m. The call came in the way calls came in at 3 a.m. urgent, clinical, no preamble. Samantha was awake before her feet hit the floor. She was in her car in 4 minutes. The trauma bay was already in motion when she pushed through the doors. She took the chart from the resident without looking at the table. Read the vitals. Read the nature of the damage. Assessed what she was dealing with and in what order she needed to deal with it. Then she looked at the face. But something in her registered it. Filed it. The specific face of a woman she had last seen in a grocery store aisle pointing her toward the cheaper section. Yerin. A car accident. The damage was serious in the specific way that required exactly the skills Samantha had spent 7 years building. The wrong decision, the slower decision, the less experienced decision, would cost this woman her life. The right decision, made quickly and precisely and without hesitation, had a reasonable chance of preventing that. Yerin was conscious enough to recognize her. Their eyes met for exactly 1 second. In Yerin's face, beneath the pain, beneath the fear, was something specific and exposed. The terror of someone who knew exactly what she had done and was now entirely, helplessly, at the mercy of the person she had done it to. Samantha looked at her for exactly 1 second. Then she put her gloves on. Let's go, she said to her team. Talk me through it. 3 hours and 22 minutes. In surgery, Samantha became exactly what she had trained herself to be for 7 years. Focused. Precise. Completely unmoved by personal feeling. Yerin was simply the patient on the table. Nothing more. At 6:33 a.m. she walked out of the OR. Pulled her mask down. She's stable, she told the resident. She's going to be okay. Then she went to write her notes. The way she always did. Then moved to the next thing. Seojin was in the waiting room. Samantha saw her from the corridor before she went in. Seojin was sitting in one of the standard waiting room chairs, the plastic kind, the chairs that made no distinction between the people who sat in them. With her coat still on and her hands in her lap and the specific stillness of someone who had been sitting there for a long time with something very heavy. She had been called when the accident happened. She had driven 3 hours through the dark. She had arrived at the hospital and asked at the desk and been told which surgeon was operating and had sat down with that information and not moved. Samantha pushed through the waiting room door. Seojin looked up. Stood. Slowly, like someone not entirely sure their legs would cooperate. They looked at each other across the waiting room. The specific weight of everything that had moved between them, the gala, the car attack, the planted information, the event 3 weeks ago, all of it, present in the space without needing to be named. Seojin crossed the room, stopped in front of her, and Samantha saw, for the first time in every interaction they'd had, something in Seojin's face that was none of the things it had always been. Not calculation. Not wounded pride. Not the performance of composure over something uglier. Something honest. Something that had been stripped of everything else by 3 hours of sitting in a plastic chair not knowing. You didn't have to, Seojin said. Her voice was different. Quieter and less managed than Samantha had ever heard it. You could have, there were other surgeons. You could have. No, Samantha said. Simply. I couldn't. Seojin looked at her. Not understanding at first. Then understanding. She's going to be okay, Samantha said. You can see her in about an hour. A nurse will come and find you. She turned to go. Samantha. She stopped. The sound of her name in Seojin's voice, stripped of everything, just the word, was different from any way it had been said before. She didn't turn immediately. Waited. I'm sorry. Seojin's voice cracked on it. Not performed. Just cracked. For all of it. From the beginning. I know it doesn't, she stopped. Started again. I'm sorry. Samantha stood there for a moment. Then she turned. Looked at Seojin fully. At the woman who had pointed a finger at a gala floor and set years of damage in motion. At the woman who had sent people after her on a midnight road and had thought information could be weaponized into the destruction of something she fundamentally didn't understand. At the woman standing in a hospital waiting room at 6:40 in the morning who had just said something true for the first time. I know, Samantha said. Not forgiveness. Not absolution. Not the erasure of anything that had happened. Just the acknowledgement of something real being offered for the first time and being received as the real thing it was. She turned. Walked back through the corridor toward her office. Toward her notes. Toward the next patient, the next case, the next thing that needed her to be exactly who she was. Jiyoung was in the corridor. He had come when she called, the brief text she had sent from outside the door. Yeren was the patient. She's stable. I'm okay. He had been in his car in 4 minutes and in the hospital in 11, which was the same math she used, which she had noticed and not mentioned. He was leaning against the wall just outside the waiting room door. He had heard enough of the conversation inside through the door's narrow window to understand what had happened. He looked at her when she came through. She looked back. Everything that had ever needed to be said between them had been. The kitchen table. The full account. The 3 questions and the unhedged answers. The month of building and the weeks of navigating and the specific work of 2 people who had chosen to be honest with each other even when honesty was the harder thing. He pushed off the wall. Fell into step beside her. They walked down the corridor together in the early morning light of a hospital that was already filling with the business of a new day. Thursday. The restaurant near the hospital. Their table. She told him about Yeren, not the surgery, which she kept in its professional compartment the way she kept all surgeries, but the moment after. Seojin in the waiting room. What was said? He listened. All of it. Without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. You never stop, he said. Stop what? He looked at her across the small table with the expression that had been building since a gala floor, and a champagne glass and 4 words he'd said before he'd planned to say them. The expression that had nowhere left to go and had long since stopped trying. Being exactly who you are, he said. Regardless of what's in the room. Regardless of what it costs. You just are. She picked up her fork. Considered this. Someone has to be, she said. He watched her. The restaurant was quiet around them. The city moved past the window behind her. The light was low and warm and entirely ordinary. Yes, he said. Someone does. They moved to the car. Jiyoung held her hand. They can never make me lose you ever, he said. Samantha smiled. They won't, she replied. I love you. Jiyoung leaned close and kissed her. I love you too. They drove home. The Baek house was louder than usual that Sunday. His younger brother was arguing with his father about something sports-related from across the dining table. His mother was pretending not to take sides while very clearly taking sides. Someone in the kitchen dropped a spoon. Someone laughed too hard at something that wasn't actually that funny. Samantha sat beside Jiyoung at the center of it all with her sleeves rolled slightly back and a glass of wine untouched near her hand, watching the room with the quiet expression of someone who still occasionally noticed the life she had somehow become part of. At one point his mother reached across the table to adjust the serving dish near Samantha before saying softly, almost absent-mindedly, "You've made this house feel full again." The table quieted for half a second. Not awkwardly. Just enough for the words to land. Samantha looked up. Jiyoung looked at his mother. And his father, who had once measured people carefully before allowing them into his world, simply nodded once and continued eating like nothing emotional had just been said at all. Which somehow made it matter more. Under the table, Jiyoung's hand found Samantha's briefly. Not possessive. Not performative. Just there. Outside, the city moved quietly through the evening beyond the windows of the house. Inside, for the first time in a very long time, everything felt settled. Was there ever a moment you thought she wouldn't make it back from? Tell me in the comments. And if Samantha and Jiyoung's story is one you want to keep following, like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. You already know more is coming. Thank you for watching.